Welcome back everybody. This is the third video in a series, an ongoing series about how I got into electronic music. Now I might have mentioned in a previous video that I came into I got to techno through the ambient end. But there was a lot of stuff between, I guess, the most basic minimalist ambient and the most full-on club-focused techno. And in the early to mid-90s, I went on, quite a journey from here to here. And I want to talk about a few key releases in this video. We'll start with one that many people might know, but is actually very hard to get on CD now. And I'm very grateful to the patron that sent me this, because I didn't have it on CD and it was expensive to buy. And that is the KLF's Chill Out, with the sheep on the front. This is obviously Jimmy Corti and Bill Drummond. And I think this was the first album they made before they kind of split from Alex Patterson. Maybe Alex Patterson was involved with some of this, recorded live at Trance Central. It's essentially all one ambient track. But this is hard to get nowadays because when the KLF finally put it on streaming service about 2 years ago, they had to strip out all the Elvis samples from this album. So you really can't get the original version on streaming at all. It's only available on CD and vinyl. The vinyl is crazy expensive. Personally, I wouldn't buy the vinyl because of surface noise. This album has a lot of very quiet bits. There are hardly any beats in it. It's just floaty ambient stuff with lots of incidental noises. And you don't want the surface noise of vinyl disturbing that. At least I don't think so. You might disagree. There are certain elements to vinyl playback for ambient music that makes it sound larger and more expansive. But I think particularly for this, the KLF's Chill Out, I don't know whether that's really worth it, especially for the money being asked on Discogs. And you have to be careful because there are a number of bootlegs available. You don't want those. You want the original. I guess the original is going to be, what, 400 euros, 500 euros, something like that. The CD might even be 50. But that was something I got into pretty early, maybe just after a friend played me The Blue Room by The Orb. I think he got this as well. It took me, again, a few years to kind of get into it because initially I just thought it's a bit boring, nothing happens. But after a while you realise it's a whole mood, it's an atmosphere, it's like wallpaper. It's too interesting to ignore, but you can ignore it if you want to. I think that's a bastardization of a Brian Eno quote. Next one comes from Moby. I think a lot of people will know this album, and I don't love it. There are some good tracks on it, especially the stuff with Mimi Gazy, is that how you say her name, as a singer, and Him is pretty good, Anthem's pretty good, Feeling So Real, absolutely bloody dreadful. But I bought this, not for the main CD, which looks like this, but for the bonus CD, which is called Underwater. And I think it's 3, maybe 4 very sort of constant, cool, sweeping ambient tracks. Again, another mood, even more minimal than the KLF's Chill Out, because it doesn't have all the incidental noises. It's just these kind of long, drawn out synth washes. And I think Moby went on to sort of develop that side of his creative oeuvre as, was it sleep music or hotel music, I think he called it. But this was the original, the Underwater tracks on here, although I think there was a version of Him called the 33.3 version, which may have been 33 and a third minutes long, which was like a version of Him, which was also unbelievably ambient. Just an entire, just a constant mood. It's somewhat dark. There's not a lot of light in these ambient tracks, but I think they're a fantastic listen. Even nowadays, they still hold up. Next one. Okay, let's build the pace a little bit. Now, I remember buying this. This is something I bought recently, recently, last couple of years. But I remember buying this for the first time out, I think in 92 or 93. A, because I'd read a little bit about them. B, because I liked the cover. And C, mainly because it was cheap. So if you lived in the UK in the 90s, you might remember that a standard price, or the standard price for a CD single, was £4. And then things might get discounted to £2.99, £1.99 or 99p if you were really lucky. And I bought the Future Sound of London's Cascade for $1.99, I think. And that was one of the reasons I bought it, because it was cheap and I was broke. And I'm so glad I did, because this opened up a whole world to me. This is, yeah, Cascade EP. It came out as the lead single for the Lifeforms album, which many people know as an absolute stone cold ambient techno classic nowadays. And I'm probably not even going to talk about that because it's canon, right? It's already been done to death. But Cascade is a bit different because it features sort of like a radio edit of the track Cascade. It's like broken beat, psychedelic ambient swirls. There are rhythms in this kind of thing. It does lend itself very nicely to home listening. Oh, the CD case is creaking here. But then there are 5 other parts. And this is what's great about the Future Sound of London. They expand a lot of the motifs in the original piece and extend them out into different directions and build an entire new track out of that extension. So this EP, I think maybe the other reason I bought it was because it's 40 minutes long. So if you like Lifeforms, the album, you're really going to lose your if you hear this or when you hear this. Well worth tracking down. Vinyl is hard to get. CD is pretty easy to get. As usual, I'll put Discog links in the description box below. What's next? Oh, yeah, okay. Now this thing, I think this came out, it says here 94. So this will be a couple of years after maybe the Future Sound of London and the Chill Out. I think the Moby was 95, I could be wrong. Yeah, 95. So that came even later than this. Now, I remember this being just an absolute bomb in my world of music discovery when I first heard it. And it's an Orb remix of an artist called Suzuki K1. And the track is called Satellite Serenade. And there are 2 versions of this, and then 2 remixes by the Orb. And the main one is the Trans-Asian Express mix, which starts with a sample from, I think, a David Attenborough documentary where he's talking about the Trans-Amazonian Highway. And it builds and builds and builds and builds into this sort of like head nod, ambient techno monster. I think it's like 10, 15 minutes long. The dub's a bit shorter. I think I did find this on vinyl somewhere. I think I've got a vinyl copy somewhere, either there or behind me here. But I think it's worth getting for the CD because on the vinyl, well, there are 2 vinyls. There's the one with the first 2 tracks, the originals, and then there's the other one with the Orb remixes. You want the Orb remixes really, although the first 2 versions are really, really good, but it's the Orb mix that's the classic here, yeah. So I think I discovered this just after I heard, the Blue Room and things like that, and after I'd probably maybe bought the Ultra World album and maybe its remixes album. But again, that's sort of canon, so I'm not really wanting to discuss it as much as I am more obscure releases. And then this last one, is very, very dear to my heart, and I don't think people talk about this artist enough. And I'll tell you how I got there, first of all. The artist is the Psychick Warriors of Gaia, which is a completely bonkers name. Now, I discovered them through this compilation, which we covered last time, Trans Europe Express, and it's got a Psychick Warriors of Gaia track on here called Dust. So I'd heard that, and then if you remember back to episode 1, I talked about this Orbital single release called Lush 3, which features a remix by the Psychick Warriors of Gaia. So I'd already had form with them, I'd read about them, I'd heard a few things, so I thought, okay, I'm going to try a single. And I'm so glad I did, because this is called Obsidian. Now, you've got to be careful with this, because you do want the single version called Organically Decomposed. The Organically Decomposed version is the one you want. I think they did a sort of farewell gig about 8 or 9 years ago, but for me, they'd long since disappeared, like it's really since the end of the 90s. They pretty much vanished. But this thing came out in, 91, 92, something like that. And I think it was so far ahead of its time, because the Psychick Warriors of Gaia, they have a more tribal sound, a more pagan ritual kind of sound. So this version of Obsidian starts with a very sort of low sound and then some weird indistinct vocals, as if like a pagan ritual is taking place, and it builds layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, and then this little melody comes in, and then more layers and more layers. And not until we get to the 15-minute mark does the whole thing drop out momentarily and then kick back in, but with more insistent percussion. But what's really interesting about this track is there's no 4/4 kick drum underpinning it, not at all. It's carried really, through tribal percussion, synth lines, hi-hats, pads, vocal samples, and it's truly terrific. I played it again just now, just to double check the timing of where it drops out. 15 minutes. And the other tracks on here are pretty good as well, like Patience and Challenge, those. Now, the thing is, you might be tempted to think, well, Obsidian is on their album of Biospheres and Sacred Grooves. Don't get that, it's not the same version. And also that album, I don't think is all that interesting. Nowhere near as interesting as the stuff on here. So my tip is to buy this and then buy a single called Exit 23. And there are 2 CDs of that, or 2 12 inches maybe. There's the normal one, I think there's one called Return version, and then there's a Source version. And then on the second CD single, or 12 inch, there are 3 Drum Club remixes. None of this stuff, this Psychick Warriors of Gaia stuff, I can't find it on streaming services. I don't think it's there. And it's the kind of obscure artist that probably isn't going to have a lot of long-term support by a major label if they weren't really signed to one. I mean, this came out on KK Records, which is a Belgian label. This is when they put the phone number as the label on the CD. Amazing. And I just think the Psychick Warriors of Gaia are one of the most underrated electronic artists of our time. So yeah, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed or picked up on something you might want to go and have a listen to or buy. Most of this stuff is pretty cheap on CD on Discogs. And I'll see you in the next episode.